Hi there, and welcome to this episode of the Lawdown, our CMO podcast where we talk about the employment and partnership issues behind some key news stories. My name is Beth Hale. I'm a partner at CMO, and I'm joined today by Emma Bartlett, also a partner, and Gabrielle Lintott, one of our senior associates. We're going to talk about three stories today. The first is a story about the police dismissing an employee for sexual jokes made in the workplace. Gabrielle's going to talk about an AI advert, which has raised a few eyebrows, and I'm finally going to talk about the Foreign Office chief, Sir Ollie Robbins, being dismissed and what we can learn from that by way of, in terms of the employment law story behind it and the sort of cultural and workplace issues we can learn from that story. We're recording this, I should just say, on the 24th of April, 2026. And that story, that Ollie Robbins story, has been moving pretty fast this week. So it is really possible that we record this and then there are further developments. So that's why I flagged the date. So Emma, if it's all right, I'll pass over to you to talk about the police. We've talked about the police quite a lot in this podcast, so it doesn't feel like a new story, but let's tell me about what the latest thing is.
Thank you. Thanks, Beth. Great introduction. The story that caught my eye was the Met Police dismissing an employee who was actually their quality control officer for sexual jokes, including saying things like playing with his joystick and other similar innuendos. He succeeded in the Employment Tribunal, is ruled unfair, and also discrimination for something arising out of his disability, which included ADHD. And I thought this was really interesting because it's in line with a string of cases relating to neurodiversities in the workplace, where employers are criticised for not properly considering medical evidence relating to the person's ADHD and understanding how that is important to take into account in determining things like disciplinary matters as much as management issues and performance management issues as well. And this sort of, when you start reading it, you think, well, this seems like an obvious one for dismissal, making sexual jokes in the workplace. There's enough diversity and inclusion training now that tells staff that making sexual innuendos to colleagues in the workplace is not okay, and it can give rise to sexual harassment. But the employers have this balancing act to do to understand, well, what's the reason for this person? Is it just pure horseplay and ignoring anything that they've been told by the employer not to do, or is it something else? And that's exactly what it is in this case. I should say that this was an Employment Tribunal decision, so it's a first instance decision. Don't know if it's going to be appealed. It doesn't bind any higher courts, it doesn't bind any other tribunals, but as I said, it seems to me that despite the headlines of a Met Police employee being dismissed for making sexual jokes, the finding is in line with the other legislation on not legislation, case law on this. So in this case, the employee was diagnosed with ADHD and something called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which to be honest, I've never come across before. But the tribunal heard that these conditions affected his impulse control and ability to recognise social boundaries. And so he'd produced medical evidence to show that his social boundaries were blurred, and he did not appreciate that his actions were inappropriate in the workplace. And it's just the fact that the employer failed to consider this as part of the disciplinary process. The investigation report, the individual accepted responsibility for some of them, but also provided cogent medical evidence to demonstrate that his behaviour was a manifestation of his condition. And also there was evidence to show that whilst some of the female colleagues had said they were extremely uncomfortable by some of the comments, a couple of the other colleagues were saying that it was just more like it was annoying and inappropriate, but that they were not personally distressed. And the finding in the investigation report was that there was a case to answer with regards to misconduct, but not gross misconduct. And so you can see how on the one hand, an employer might have elevated it in a disciplinary to gross misconduct just by virtue of the very nature of it. But had they properly taken into account all the medical evidence, it might have not resulted in dismissal and would have been treated as a misconduct issue. But again, lessons to learn for employers from this is literally to just pay attention to the medical evidence, and where you're on notice that somebody has this type of condition or any type of neurodiversity, that getting and paying attention to the medical evidence and understanding how best to support an employee in that situation. He also said, it's not just the fact of his condition, I should note here, that he was also not quite on the right medication. He had a lack of medication at the time because of his high blood pressure. So there was still something he could do to improve his behaviour had the medication been right. And again, that's a balancing act for the employer in that situation. And where they ignored the medical evidence. This guy also had almost 20 years service, I think, with the Met Police. So there were mitigating factors that probably were not taken into account. But I just thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, and I think that you read a lot of the press coverage, in particular the headlines, and you sort of you sort of see that people might go, well, hang on a second, it's okay to tell sexualized jokes in the workplace and you can keep your job. And I think that is just, of course, massively oversimplifying the issue, isn't it? Because no one was suggesting that what he had done was acceptable or okay, but it's about sort of, as you say, looking at the medical evidence, thinking about what's proportionate and what's not, and the reality of whether distress was caused, and the reality of whether there is something less than dismissal which could have resolved the issue. So could they have given him a final written warning, and then if then his conduct did not improve or the issues came to light again, then it would result in dismissal. So it's very much not a anything goes in the workplace kind of message. It's just you've got to deal with it appropriately, taking into account all of the circumstances. And I think that's a really important lesson for employers. So just something for employers to think about.
Yeah, definitely. There's it's similar to one of my favourite neurodiversity cases, only because it really neatly sets out that if there are mitigating factors, and in the case I'm thinking about, failure to take into account medical evidence and how reasonable adjustments should have been implemented for an autistic employee in this case. And then that knowledge was lost as there were frequent manager changes. It resulted in an employee having to work when he should have been having rest breaks. And the fact that he didn't have rest breaks meant that he became stressed. And then, similar to this case, he then manifested in a way where he was making inappropriate remarks to a female colleague again. But it could have been resolved had the adjustments been made. But interesting.
Yeah, it's a really interesting case, and I think we are seeing more and more of these that just just a key lesson to learn is that sort of knee-jerk reactions often end badly, right? And you've got to think quite cautiously about how you respond to these things. Gabrielle, do you want to tell us about the AI advert and why it's caused such outrage?
Yeah, sure. Slightly different train of thought. Yeah, but yes, touching on this recent billboard, it was part of an advertising campaign for a British AI company, Narwhal Labs, who put a rather large advertisement up at Bristol Airport. The advert featured half of a woman's face and contained the words, "She outworks everyone and she'll never ask for a raise. Meet your new AI employee, always on, never sick, and no HR required." A similar ad featuring the same woman stated, "Working 9 to 5, she works 24/7 and she starts for free." So this has resulted in quite a few headlines as well, some asserting this is misogyny with a marketing budget, and many commenting on how it is deploying sexist labour stereotypes under the guise of innovation. In this case, The Guardian had reported that the Advertising Standards Authority has received several complaints, and they are looking into these ads further and considering whether an investigation should be commenced. The billboard itself has been taken down. Obviously, AI is a super hot topic at the moment, and Reese Witherspoon, she received a bit of backlash recently after she made some comments on Instagram about how she needed to learn as much as she could about AI, whilst also pointing out that women have much lower usage rates compared to men, and that the jobs women hold are 3 times more likely to be automated by AI. Now, I don't know if those statistics are correct, but the backlash was more around whether she was being paid by an AI company to support the technology, to which she said, no, I am just, starting to use it. My kids are using it. Everyone's talking about it. It's obviously being used in every business sector, and I just want to encourage everyone to use it. So that's Reese. Then we move on to Jude Law, who has become the face of Legora, which is a growing AI-powered platform designed for lawyers. And a similar AI platform, Harvey, has recently signed none other than Harvey Specter from the television series Suits to act as a brand ambassador. So I think all of this just gives some pause for thought around who AI is really being targeted at, and thinking about whether it is more accessible to certain individuals, perhaps over others. And I think we need to be thinking more around not only how the use of AI is undoubtedly going to reshape different industries and the way that we carry out work and do our jobs, but it's whether and to what extent AI has the potential to reshape who actually participates in certain industries and takes on certain roles, which I think is important, where businesses should still be thinking about ways to proactively encourage an inclusive workplace culture and, valuing diverse viewpoints and having employing staff from diverse backgrounds. So just thinking about the role that AI is going to play, not in terms of making all of our jobs more efficient, but more broadly in the workplace and getting into roles as well.
Thanks, Gabrielle. So interesting. I think that I didn't know about the that Harvey were also finding someone called Harvey to promote their product. So interesting. Liverpool Street Station is full of huge posters of Jude Law advertising Legora. The thing that really struck me about that, the billboard at Bristol Airport, she never asks for a raise, is how often AI assistants are portrayed in that way, as a woman who will do anything for you, who won't ask why, who won't push back. And I think that is true professionally and in kind of personal AI bots as well. And I think that it's really, for me, really problematic in terms of that portrayal of women and how that sort of carrying on stereotypes to which we've been subjected for so long. I think it really surprises me that no one looked at that advert and thought, it's not very sexist, isn't it? I should during the process of making it. And I found that really surprising. And I think for AI, which is supposed to be such a sort of the way of the future, forward looking, to actually be perpetuating those kinds of stereotypes is really problematic, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. I hadn't seen the comment that was also attached to it that you mentioned about working 9 to 5. She works 24/7 and she'll start for free. It feels a little bit like it's a dig at the gender who might otherwise not be able to work 24/7.
Yeah.
It's not okay, is it, to have that type of sexism being brought into adverts? And the Jude Law one, I don't know how to feel about that, because the strapline was law just got more attractive because it's got Jude Law to look at. It's sort of I feel it's a little bit undermining. Yeah, but it's interesting that the use of the reference to AI might in some way justify a stereotypical comment. I wonder if, and there was one last thing that I would say on this, that the AI campaign at Bristol Airport, whether that was generated by AI, was AI asked to give its own thoughts on what that campaign could be?
Question. Yeah.
If AI came up with the campaign, it then comes up to the whole debate of whether AI is naturally going to be biased and have these stereotypes because of what it pulls off the internet or the instructions that it's given.
And I think that's a really good point, Emma. I think it goes back to right in the kind of really quite early days of AI being used in things like recruitment, or there was an example that someone once talked to me about around AI being asked to trawl through the CVs of people who had succeeded in an organization, and that's what it would look for in future CVs. And one of the things that AI might pick up, for example, is people who do well in this organization are people who have on their CV and their extracurricular interests that they play cricket, and that the risk of that is, of course, that what you're more likely to get then is that the CVs that are pulled out for interview in the next recruitment round are men who are educated at public schools. And so it is that sort of perpetuation of stereotypes without human oversight to go, hang on a second, here's why this is problematic. And of course AI is an incredible, the AI tools that lots of us are using are incredibly powerful and useful, but I think it's a reminder, isn't it, that of the importance of actually having somewhere a human who goes, hang on a second, I'm not sure that's all right. So finally, we were going to talk about Ollie Robbins, who many of you will, I would have thought almost everyone listening will know that he was the head of the Foreign Office. He was the sort of head honcho in the Foreign Office, who was tasked with carrying out the security screening for Peter Mandelson when Peter Mandelson was being proposed as the US ambassador for the UK, and who has been sacked this week because it is alleged that he didn't provide Downing Street with the correct with sufficient information about the fact that Peter Mandelson had failed the security vetting. Now, I don't propose today to go into the sort of political issues which this gives rise to, because it has been talked about a lot in Parliament this week. I think there's still some questions around who knew what when, how it has all happened. But I think what we were talking about internally and what it really made us think about is that taking on responsibility when someone makes a mistake, who takes the flak for that mistake, who takes responsibility for that, and how do you encourage people in senior positions, and how do you encourage people to speak up in workplaces if people feel that they are going to be hung out to dry if they've made a mistake, and that the leaders aren't going to take responsibility. Now, obviously, Ollie Robbins was a very senior person, so he had a large amount of responsibility. And as I say, I'm not commenting on sort of the rights and wrongs of it, but I think just the perception is that Keir Starmer has slightly hung Ollie Robbins out to dry, and I guess I just feel like that if you are a leader in an organisation, it is so important to make clear to people that, of course, everyone makes mistakes, and you can make mistakes, and the important thing is to fess up to those mistakes and to talk about them, and then we can resolve them, and not to make people feel like if they have made a mistake they'll lose their job. Of course there are some mistakes that are so big that that's sort of inevitable, and I think this the scale of the issue in the Ollie Robbins case is not really what I'm talking about, but I think just really drives home, doesn't it, the importance of that, encouraging people to speak up, talking about mistakes, and knowing that people in senior positions have your back, I think is so important in a workplace.
Yeah, that's exactly what I took from that story. in terms of where they were indicating, and the headline was pressure from number 10, and that headline was what made me think, it's the sort of thing that you hear when people say, I couldn't do my job properly because I was fearful of not going along with what I understood. I was getting serious pressure not to rock the boat, so to speak.
Yeah, and it comes back to that sort of whistleblowing issue, doesn't it? That, you know, people are don't feel they're able to blow the whistle, and, you know, the very sort of foundations of the whistleblowing protection legislation was that to make clear that people should feel able to speak up where there are issues.
Yeah, exactly. So from an employer's perspective, ensuring that there isn't that type of expectation, serious pressure on anybody to perform their job in a way which might mean that they're not doing it objectively, is quite important. I was just going to add another story in The Guardian that I saw earlier this morning about the same story. And it was a whole article about the guy who was sat behind Ollie Robbins. He was wearing a cravat. I don't know if you saw it.
What was the point? That he shouldn't have been wearing a cravat, or that something about
who is this well-dressed person sat behind Ollie Robbins? It's like the funniest thing. But there's a whole Guardian article where they'd tracked this guy down, and he explained that he had many cravats, and he wears them to stop the collars of his shirt getting dirty. Anyway.
You don't see many cravats these days. So it's a nice touch. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Emma and Gabrielle. Thank you everyone for listening. Sorry that there's been a bit of a gap since our last Lawdown, and we hope that the next one will come out a bit sooner. And if you have any stories you think it would be good for us to cover, or anything else you'd like to ask us, please do have a look at our website at cm-murray.com, and feel free to email us. Thanks a lot.